Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to episode 78 of Codename Kids Next Door, Operation Treaty. We begin this episode with a flashback showing us Nigel Uno before he became number one of the Kids Next Door organization back when he was a cadet. In this flashback, Nigel is in the Kids Next Door Arctic base and he's facing off against a giant machine for a test. Number 5 is watching Nigel's test, but she's not the only one. Her teammates, number 8A and number 8B, and her older sister, number 11, are also watching Nigel's test. And the Sector V operatives of this time are all impressed with Nigel's performance. Number 11 compliments her younger sister for suggesting that Nigel Uno join the Kids Next Door organization. Number 5 admits that Nigel has his flaws, but overall thinks that he is Kids Next Door material. Number 274 then reveals that he's watching Nigel's test too, and he tells the Sector V operatives of this time that he will determine for himself if Nigel Uno is Kids Next Door material or not. So after watching more of the fight, Nigel eventually defeats the giant machine, and number 274 approaches Nigel, clapping and congratulating him for a job well done. Number 274 also says he's curious about if Nigel has what it takes to take him, number 274, on in a sparring match. Nigel doubts this, but number 274 clarifies that he's not giving Nigel a choice, and then he proceeds to charge towards Nigel for this sudden sparring match. Nigel puts up a good fight against number 274, but in the end, number 274 is able to catch a punch that Nigel tried to throw, and he also managed to tie Nigel's shoelaces. Number 274 is still impressed with Nigel's performance, and he says that Nigel is good, but insists that he, number 274, is the best. Nigel doesn't disagree with this. After the sparring match, number 8x10 approaches Nigel and number 274. He wishes to take a picture for the Kids Next Door news, and number 274 and Nigel are happy to oblige, so the two of them begin to shake hands, and number 8x10 takes the picture. We then head to the present day of the series, and number 1 is looking at the picture of number 274 and himself shaking hands. The picture is hanging on a wall with several other pictures somewhere on the Kids Next Door Moonbase headquarters. Number 1 is thinking back on this particular memory, but he's doing so in a sad manner because of number 274's betrayal during the Season 2 finale, Operation End. While number 1 is still thinking about this memory, his teammates approach him and tell him that they were able to get a new Treehouse computer program because the previous Treehouse computer program for the Sector V Treehouse was destroyed during the events of Operation Girlfriend. Some of number 1's teammates bring up the events of Operation Girlfriend, including the previous Treehouse computer program falling in love with number 1, the Treehouse computer program attacking number 1 and Lizzie, and how Lizzie broke up with number 1. Number 1 is clearly not happy about being reminded of the events of that particular episode. Number 5 then mentions that number 48 Flavor's ice cream supply vehicle has arrived at the Moonbase, and number 5 suggests that number 1 join the rest of the team in going to the ice cream supply vehicle. Number 1 politely declines the offer, saying he's going to see what's going on the bridge, and he says that he will cross paths with them at a later point in time. Number 1's teammates are shown not liking this answer, but they do accept number 1's request all the same and agree to meet up with him at a later point in time. So while number 1 is going off to the bridge, and while the rest of the Sector V operatives are going to the ice cream supply vehicle, we see that the two shadowy figures from Operation White House and Operation Girlfriend, the same shadowy figures affiliated with the Splinter Cell, are watching this. And the two shadowy figures agree that they believe the time is right for Number One to learn the truth about the Splinter Cell. So we then go to the 4 other Sector V operatives. They've arrived at the ice cream supply vehicle, but Number 48 Flavors refuses to let them enter the vehicle because he brings up how the 4 present Sector V operatives have a track record of eating the ice cream on the supply vehicle when they claim that they're helping him unload. And despite Number 48 Flavors saying that he doesn't want them to board the supply vehicle, the 4 present Sector V operatives still do try to board the vehicle anyway. But when they open up the door to the vehicle, they see that 3 teen ninjas are on the vehicle, or in the vehicle. Yes, 3 teen ninjas are in the vehicle. 2 of them are Chad Dixon, the former Number 274, and Cree Lincoln, the former Number 11. Around the time when Number One reaches the bridge, that's when the 3 teen ninjas make their presence known throughout the rest of the moon base. And the teen ninjas actually do go to the bridge, but once they arrive at the bridge, a blackout happens, and then the blackout quickly ends. It only lasts for maybe a few seconds, but after the blackout ends, the teen ninjas are gone, and Number 362 is now holding a container with a message inside. This is why the teen ninjas were on the moon base, to deliver this message. At a later point in time, we head to the Kids Next Door treehouse from Operation T.R.E.A.T.Y, the one that has a stadium. And in the stadium, we see that most, if not all, of the Kids Next Door operatives have gathered together for a meeting. Number 362 reveals to the present Kids Next Door operatives that this message from the teen ninjas was actually a request for a treaty between kids and teens. A great number of Kids Next Door operatives are weary or skeptical about the idea of a treaty with the teen ninjas, and they bring up some past instances of having troubles with teens, or they recall bad memories involving teens. And one of the Kids Next Door operatives on the stage, Number Infinity, tries to assure the operatives that he understands their concerns or their doubts. Number Infinity is the diplomat of the organization, or at least he's the head diplomat of the Kids Next Door organization. And Number Infinity tries to assure the operatives that Number Infinity tries to assure the operatives that he spoke with the teen diplomats, and the teen diplomats assure him that this treaty is supposed to be sincere, or that this treaty is a sincere desire to see kids and teens united. And Number 362 does think that the treaty is a good idea. Number 362 believes that the treaty is in the best interests of not just the Kids Next Door organization, but for kids everywhere. And Number Infinity, some operatives are still against the idea of this treaty, but Number Infinity says that he will talk with them after this current meeting is over. Number 86 says that this is Number Infinity's polite way of saying that he doesn't want to hear them complaining right now. So after the meeting ends, we see Number One heading for Number Infinity's office. While Number One is walking to Number Infinity's office, we see that there are several Kids Next Door operatives that are still not happy about the idea of this treaty, and they're venting their frustrations about it. And Number One does agree with these sentiments. He thinks that a kid and teen treaty is not going to end well. So Number One makes it to Number Infinity's office, but once he opens the door, he sees that something is going on. In Number Infinity's office, Number One sees that Chad is in the office right now. He's grabbed Number Infinity by the collar, and he's saying something along the lines about how he worked too hard to be double-crossed. Number Infinity, though, tries to remind Chad that whatever Chad is angry about wasn't Number Infinity's decision to make. Number Infinity is simply the messenger delivering a message. Number One then makes his presence known to them, and Number Infinity tries to tell Number One Or yes, Number Infinity says to Number One that it's good he arrived when he did because Chad suddenly entered his office and attacked. Chad, though, is furious when he sees Number One, and he prepares to try and attack Number One. But before Chad gets a chance to really do so, Number 86 and several other operatives enter the office, and they're able to subdue Chad before he can really put up a fight. Number Infinity, though, then tells Number 86 to capture Number 1 too. Number Infinity claims that Number 1 and Chad were working together to try and sabotage the Kid and Teen Treaty. Number 1, though, responds that Number Infinity is lying. Number 1 saw Number Infinity and Chad talking to each other when he stumbled into Number Infinity's office. But Number 86 seems more inclined to believe Number Infinity rather than Number 1. So Number 1 and Chad are chained up. Number 1 has one cuff. Yeah, they get these handcuffs. One of the cuffs is on one of Number 1's wrist, while the other side of the handcuffs are on one of Chad's wrists. So the two of them are handcuffed together. And Number 86 and several of the other Kids Next Door operatives that joined her in entering the office are now leading Number 1 and Chad to the Arctic base prison. And apparently word about this spread rather quickly because Number 48 Flavors heard about this, and he's telling the 4 other Sector V operatives that were trying to get more of Number 48 Flavors ice creams. And Number 48 Flavor says that he's being serious about this, but he also would like it if they stopped eating his ice cream. And soon enough, the 4 present Sector V operatives and Number 48 Flavors do see Number 86 and other operatives walking by with Number 1 and Chad handcuffed together. So the 4 other Sector V operatives rush to Number 1 and try to figure out what's going on. Number 1 explains to them that he caught Number Infinity and Chad talking to each other, and that Number Infinity is trying to frame him. Number 1 suspects that Number Infinity is a member of the Splinter Cell, and that he's working with the Teen Ninjas to lure the Kids Next Door into a trap with this treaty. And Number 1 urges his teammates, Number 1 urges the 4 other Sector V operatives, his teammates, to warn Number 362 about what's going on. So Number 1 and Chad are put onto a 2x4 technology flying vehicle, and Number 86 and some of the other operatives are piloting this vehicle. So they fly off to the Arctic base prison. After this happens, we see the 2 shadowy figures from the Splinter Cell watching this. One of the shadowy figures mentions that another shadowy figure's position has been compromised, and that the other shadowy figure should return to base. But one of the shadowy figures insists that the treaty must go on and steps out of the shadows. Number Infinity is indeed one of these shadowy figures. So on the flying vehicle, Number 1 and Chad are still very hostile towards each other. Number 1 is trying to figure out what Chad is up to, but Chad admits that he doesn't want to be around Number 1 right now, or being handcuffed to Number 1 is not very ideal for Chad. He admits the only reason he hasn't knocked Number 1 out yet is because he doesn't want to drag Number 1's unconscious body around. But Chad proceeds to pull out a music player, and Chad breaks some of the wires from this flying vehicle, and he attaches a music player to this. It starts to play loud heavy metal or rock music, which surprises Number 86 and the other operative. And because of their surprise, the vehicle crashes. Number 86 and the other operative have parachutes, but we see that Number 1 and Chad are okay too. And they're walking off somewhere else, or Chad is leading Number 1 somewhere. And while that's happening, we see that the 4 other Sector V operatives are trying to find Number 362. But eventually they see Number Infinity and Number 48 Flavors talking to each other, and they're wondering what's going on. Number 3 wonders if maybe Number Infinity is trying to get some more ice cream for himself, or the diplomat table, after treaty signing luncheon. Yes, there's supposed to be a luncheon after the treaty is signed, and number 3 wonders if maybe number Infinity is trying to negotiate with number 48 Flavors to give the diplomat table more rations of ice cream for this luncheon. But number 5 suspects that maybe number 48 Flavors is affiliated with number Infinity, and they're plotting something with this trap that they suspect. So they make sure they try to find number 362 quickly. Back with number 1 and Chad. The vehicle crashed somewhere in a snowy mountain. So Chad is leading number 1 somewhere throughout this snowy mountain. Number 1 is still weary of Chad, but Chad reveals that he's trying to stop the treaty because it's a trap. Number 1 figured that the treaty was a trap, but he questions why Chad would care about stopping this trap. Chad doesn't say anything, but number 1 starts to wonder if maybe the teen ninjas are being double-crossed because of the Splinter Cell's desire to... number 1 recalls how the Splinter Cell wished to eliminate all adults, good, bad, or morally ambiguous, so number 1 wonders if maybe the Splinter Cell are including the teens on their list of eliminations. Chad just sarcastically compliments number 1's deduction skills and leads him to a mini-mart. Yes, there's a mini-mart just somewhere in the middle of the snowy mountain. And number 1 doesn't see what good this will do, but Chad manages to sit down on the side of this mini-mart, or he's sitting down on the he's sitting down on the next to this mini-mart, and he urges number 1 to sit down too, and he forces number 1 to sit down, and this causes the pavement just outside of the mini-mart to flip over. So number 1 and Chad are sent down a slide of some kind. Back with the 4 other Sector V operatives, they do manage to catch number 362 before she boards a vehicle that's supposed to take the Kids Next Door operatives and the teen ninjas to the J-Huja carrier. That's what they call this big vehicle. That's where the treaty is going to be signed on. They do manage to catch number 362 before she boards the vehicle to get to the J-Huja carrier, and they insist that they need to talk to her. Number 362 is happy to listen to them, or she's very willing to listen to what they have to say, but number Infinity interrupts the conversation and insists that the 4 Sector V operatives present can talk to number 362 after the treaty, and he threatens them that they will have the same fate that number 1 has if they don't wait. So the 4 Sector V operatives are forced to wait to warn number 362 about what's going on. Back with number 1 and Chad, the slide takes them to a secret teen base. Chad explains that there's a teen base underneath all mini-marts, and he says this is why teens would hang out in a parking lot. And Chad manages to find a saw. He intends to cut the chains so that he and number 1 won't be handcuffed together anymore. And Chad also says that he wants to beat up number 1 because of number 1 took something that should have been that is to say Chad. And number 1 still doesn't understand what Chad is talking about. But then some other teen ninjas arrive, and they see number 1 chained up to Chad, and they mention that Chad violated a rule among the teen ninjas. Teen ninjas aren't supposed to tell kids about these secret teen bases, let alone or even take them there. They're not supposed to. Teen ninjas are not supposed to tell kids about the secret teen bases, and of course they're not supposed to take them there either. But seeing number 1 in the base, the teen ninjas tell Chad that he knows the penalty for this. But Chad is able to distract them, and he doesn't get enough time to actually cut the chains. So Chad is forced to board a teen ninja bike, and number 1 is still chained up to him, so number 1 is tagging along. So the other teen ninjas that were present prepare to chase after Chad and number 1. So we then head we then head to the T.R.E.A.T.Y carrier, where we see that a great number of Kids Next Door operatives and teen ninjas have gathered together. And Number Infinity is giving a speech about how rather than being kids or teens, they should all be considered youths against adulthood. And Number Infinity then introduces the leader of the teen ninjas, the Steve. Yes, he actually uses the in his name or title. But yes, the Steve acts really chill or laid back, but he gives a little speech of his own. And eventually they're preparing for to actually sign the treaty. But before they do, the Steve wishes to play a song for the event, a song that he and his band made. But when the song begins, it's loud, heavy metal or rock music, similar, if not the same, music that Chad used on the music player to distract Number 86 and the other operative that was piloting that flying vehicle earlier. The kids are in pain over this loud noise, but the teen ninjas are wearing protective earplugs, so they're not affected by the loud music. And while this is happening, we do see Number One and Chad are in the they're still in the flying teen bike, and they're on their way to the T.R.E.A.T.Y carrier. And while some of the teen ninjas are chasing after them, some of the Kids Next Door operatives securing the perimeter of the T.R.E.A.T.Y carrier join in and chasing after them after one of the teen ninjas tells them that a bike was stolen and they don't take too kindly to bike nappers. But during the commotion, the flying bike that Number One and Chad are in loses control, and it starts to crash towards the T.R.E.A.T.Y carrier, and it actually crashes into the speakers where the music is coming from. So the speakers are destroyed, so the kids are no longer in pain from the noise. So the kids are preparing to, so Number 362, now that the kids aren't listening to the music anymore because the boombox or the speakers were destroyed, Number 362 orders the Kids Next Door to fight back. So a huge fight breaks out between the Kids Next Door and the teen ninjas. And while they're fighting, Number One realizes that the handcuffs broke free. He and Chad are no longer handcuffed together. But before Number One can really do much of anything else, the Steve grabs Number One by the collar, and he's preparing to attack Number One. But Chad stops the Steve. Chad insists that Number One is his opponent to fight. So while the fight breaks out, with the fight between the Kids Next Door operatives and the teen ninjas breaking out, Number Infinity panics, saying this wasn't how things were supposed to unfold. And Number Infinity tries to make a run for it, and the 4 other Sector V operatives see this, and they chase after Number Infinity. And they chase Number Infinity to the ice cream supply vehicle, and they try to stop Number Infinity, but then Number 48 Flavors stops them. And Number 48 Flavors, Number 48 Flavors wants the 4 present Sector V operatives and Number Infinity to drop their ice cream, but he's also happy to go along with them dropping their weapons, which they thought he meant. And Number 48 Flavors reveals he's not affiliated with Number Infinity. Number 3 was actually right. Number Infinity was trying to get more ice cream rations for the diplomat table after the treaty was signed, for the luncheon after the treaty was signed. Number 3 was right. Her guess was right. Number 48 Flavors, though, has snapped. He's furious about how several Kids Next Door, Number 48 Flavors is furious about how he delivers ice cream every day to all the sectors, all day, every day. Number 48 Flavors delivers ice cream to the different tree houses throughout the Kids Next Door organization, but he doesn't really receive any thanks for his efforts, and operatives that keep trying to take the ice cream from his supply vehicle has led to Number 48 Flavors becoming furious. So Number 48 Flavors has actually set up some explosive ice cream. Number 48 Flavors intends to activate these explosive ice creams in order to break the T.R.E.A.T.Y carrier in half. And he vows that no one will ever take more of his ice cream ever again. Number Infinity and the 4 other Sector V operatives, though, are able to surprise attack number 48 Flavors, but now they're all fighting with each other, trying to stop number 48 Flavors from activating the explosives. And while that's happening, we see more of the kids next door and the Teen Ninjas fighting each other, but we also do see that number 1 and Chad's fight in particular has become very brutal. And they have some tunnel vision too. It's like they're not really paying attention to anything else going around. They're that focused on fighting each other. And eventually, though, number 48 Flavors does manage to activate the explosives. So the Jihuja carrier does break in half, and most of the kids next door operatives and most of the Teen Ninjas stop their fighting and they retreat. It looks like number 1 and Chad are the only ones who haven't stopped fighting. They're still intending to fight each other, even with the Jihuja carrier broken and falling apart, or falling from the sky. Eventually, though, number 1 and Chad, yes, they're continuing their fight, and they reach the top of one of the Jihuja carrier halves, or they reach one end of the Jihuja carrier's halves, and it's vertical now because it's falling. So they're on top of the one of the edges of the Jihuja carrier, and they're continuing their fight. Number 1 questions why Chad couldn't leave the kids next door with dignity, and saying how they all looked up to him, including himself, number 1. Chad insists, though, that this isn't his problem. Number 1 says that Chad was the best there was, and this angers Chad even more. He insists he still is the best, and he tries to throw a punch towards number 1, but number 1 manages to catch the punch, and he also managed to tie Chad's shoelaces, much like what Chad did back in the flashback at the beginning of this episode. Chad then trips, and he's hanging on the edge of the, he's hanging off the ledge of the Jihuja carrier, and number 1 has a 2x4 technology weapon with him, and he's preparing to deliver the finishing blow to Chad. But before number 1 actually has the chance to deliver the finishing blow, the ice cream supply vehicle approaches this edge of the Jihuja carrier. The 4 other Sector V operatives and number Infinity were able to defeat number 48 Flavors after he set off the explosive. And number 5 insists that number 1 shouldn't do this. Number 1 questions why he shouldn't put an end to this traitor once and for all. And number 5 responds that Chad is still one of them. Number 1 is baffled to hear this, and Chad clarifies he didn't truly betray the Kids Next Door organization. He was a teen operative like number 9, aka Maurice. And number 274 insists that he's been helping the organization all this time while maintaining his cover. Number 1 still doesn't believe number 274. He brings up how number 274 was willing to hurl the old moon base into the sun during the Season 2 finale. Chad insists that Kree was going to do the same thing, and he had to stop her from going through with that idea. Number 1, though, is still skeptical. But Chad responds that he's been helping the kids next door all along. He brought up that he went to number Infinity earlier to warn him about the Teen Ninjas planning to double-cross the kids next door. But Chad is still furious because he says for all the efforts he's done to help the organization, they still chose number 1. Number 1 figures that Chad is talking about the Splinter Cell, but Chad clarifies that the Splinter Cell is not actually a Splinter Cell. They simply call themselves a Splinter Cell in order to cover their tracks about their true intentions. And number 1 is confused by this. Chad clarifies that there are other operatives further up on the hierarchy compared to number 362, the Supreme Leader, and says that there are even some operatives that number 362 doesn't know, even though she is the Supreme Leader. Chad is about to explain more about what the Splinter Cell really is, but he's interrupted by number Infinity. Number Infinity walks down to where Chad and number 1 are, using these floating platforms that suddenly appear and disappear with the blink of an eye. And number Infinity says that number 1 will know what he's been chosen for in good time. Number Infinity, though, says it's time for them to retreat now that their covers have been blown. So Number Infinity and Number 274 pick their noses, and this causes boogers to surround them. These boogers are some sort of teleportation device because they suddenly disappear. Number 1, though, is surprised by this. He still wants to know what he's been chosen for. At a later point in time, Number 1 is looking at the picture of Number 274 and himself shaking hands again, and he's thinking to himself about how no one has seen Number 274 and Number Infinity since that moment, and he's still mulling over what Number 274 told him about how there are other Kids Next Door operatives further up on the hierarchy than the Supreme Leader, and operatives that the Supreme Leader doesn't even know about. And Number 1's still trying to figure out what this means exactly, but the rest of his teammates arrive. They bring up that they want to go raid the pizza supply for the organization. Number 1 is trying to decline, but this time his teammates don't accept his answer, and they drag Number 1 off with them to join them. And while this is happening, Number Infinity is watching this with the other Splinter Cell member, and we find out that this other member, this other shadowy figure, is actually Number 74.239. So Number 74.239 and Number Infinity both agree with each other that the time is coming, or the time is right. It's time to take Number 1 away. And after that, we get the end credits scene, which shows the Steve and several other teen ninjas are using parachutes. They're using parachutes to land safely after they escaped from the collapsing J-Huja carrier, and they're singing a song about the event with the J-Huja carrier breaking in half and them trying to escape. And he says that everyone is okay during this song. And that is how we end this episode. So there you go. This was the last full episode of Season 6. It's the Season 6 finale, and it's the last full episode of the series. But it's not the series finale. The series finale is a TV special. And there's 2 TV specials, a crossover and the series finale. And we'll be covering those, recap and thoughts, now that we've covered all of the Season 6 entries. But yes, this episode, the Season 6 finale, is also Season 6's heavy hitter episode, the full episode that leaves a big impact on the series' overall storyline. I had mentioned before, each season has their own heavy hitter episodes. Most of them are the series finale. Season 3 and Season 4 were the exceptions. But yes, for anyone who is curious, I would consider Operation Grow Up, Operation End, Operation Graduates, Operation Maurice, Operation It, and this episode, Operation Treaty, to be the heavy hitter episodes of each season. And this is the heavy hitter episode because it ties into 2 other heavy hitter episodes, plus it accumulates more of the Splinter Cell saga that was being shown throughout Season 6, the Splinter Cell saga reaches a new revelation right before the series finale, and we also do tie into other heavy hitter episodes. So yes, this episode reveals that Number 274 didn't actually betray the Kids Next Door like we were led to believe with the events of Season 2's finale, Operation End. Number 274 was actually a teen operative all along, like Number 9, Maurice. And yes, Operation Maurice, Season 4's heavy hitter episode, was what first revealed that there are Kids Next Door operatives that can stay Kids Next Door operatives even after they become teens, and how they have to go undercover. So this heavy hitter episode tied into those 2, revealing that Number 274 didn't actually betray the Kids Next Door, and that he was actually a teen operative like Number 9, aka Maurice. And we have Mo Willems to thank for this. Mo Willems was the Mo Willems was like the co-head writer alongside Tom Warburton, the series creator, for the first 4 seasons of Codename Kids Next Door. Mo Willems did co-write Operation Naughty, which is supposed to be the season 5 premiere in production order, and he also did help to co-write the TV movie Operation Zero. So Mo Willems still did end up playing a role with the series, or he still Mo Willems still was involved with the series in some way, even after he left the series regularly to create some kids books, or to write some kids books. Yes, I mentioned in the recap and thoughts video for Operation Maurice that one of Tom Warburton's blog posts clarified that the idea behind Operation Maurice was to kind of acknowledge how Mo Willems was not going to be a regular crew member of the series after season 4, and that he was off to fulfill his own projects, or he wanted to go off and do some other projects. So Operation Maurice was meant to be a tribute to Mo Willems' contributions to the series. How Number 9, aka Maurice, was meant to fill in a similar role that Mo Willems filled in, being a dedicated member, but eventually going off, leaving the group, but still having ties to the group. Yes, while Mo Willems still contributed to the series, even if he wasn't a regular crew member after season 4, Maurice didn't actually leave the Kids Next Door organization. He was actually an undercover agent. So that's where the idea came from, according to this blog post. And Mo Willems was actually the one that came up with the idea that Number 274 didn't actually betray the organization. Yes, in another blog post, Tom Warburton mentions that one day he received a phone call from Mo Willems. According to this blog post, Tom Warburton says that Mo Willems suggested, what if Number 274 didn't actually betray the organization? And that's what inspired this episode. So yes, this was definitely a good example of how Mo Willems still contributed to the series quite a bit, even if he was no longer a regular crew member. And some thought it was clever how he was able to tie in the episode that was meant to pay tribute to Mo Willems' contributions to the series when he set off to complete his own projects, or to go off to try other projects. So some fans thought that was definitely a clever idea. Other fans, though, did think that Number 274 not actually being a traitor did feel a little out of left field. Some people did agree with Number 1 that Number 274 planning to launch the moon base into the sun seemed really counterproductive, and thought that Number 274's justification that Kree was going to do the same thing and he had to stop her seemed really flimsy. I guess if you really want to rationalize it, or you really want to try and make sense of Number 274's justification, I guess, yeah, he was trying to discourage Kree from trying it by saying, oh, I tried it and it didn't work. And I guess you could say Number 274 was that confident that the Kids Next Door would be able to save the moon base. But yeah, it was pretty reckless on 274's part. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the point is that Number 274 is supposed to be shown to be really reckless and kind of jumping, being very reckless, resorting to extreme methods when he could have avoided extreme methods. Some fans had even pointed out that Number 274 could have taken the same approach that Number 9 took, where Number 9 accepted his alleged decommissioning with dignity and tact, and how he didn't put up a fight. He was willing to go through with the alleged decommissioning, and so the organization still thought highly of Number 9. So Number 274 didn't necessarily have to ruin his reputation the way he did, but yeah, maybe that was the point. Now that I think about it, maybe maybe this was meant to highlight how Number 274 was reckless or resorted to extreme methods when he could have resorted to used a more reasonable approach. And this would be reflective of real life. I do know some individuals who are kind of quick to resort to extreme methods or be very reckless when they could have used a more tactful or a more reasonable approach with their methods. But yeah, maybe that was the point. But number 274 not actually being a traitor also does clarify one detail that some fans had noticed. Some fans thought that number 274 seemed like he became dumber after he became a teen ninja, after he betrayed the Kids Next Door organization. But at least now we can figure, yes, now with the revelation that he's not actually a traitor, we can figure that number 274 was just plain dumb in order to help the Kids Next Door organization out without really blowing his cover. So, whether 274 actually not being a traitor was well planned, or if it was a little out of left field, that's been a big debate among some fans. Although in another blog post, Tom Warburton did acknowledge that number 274 was the character that they really improvised the story with. Or going along with a quote that George R.R. Martin, or going with an analogy from a quote George R.R. Martin made about different types of storytellers, or different approaches to storytelling, the gardener approach and the architect approach. Tom Warburton did acknowledge, or yes, going by that analogy, number 274 was a character that they took the gardener approach with. Tom Warburton did acknowledge in another blog post that number 274's different elements to his character were not planned out from the start. They just were thought of while they came up with the series, or while they were going along with the story. Like, originally, when number 274 was first introduced, he was just meant to be a very famous and highly respected Kids Next Door operative, and that was originally going to be his only appearance. But when Season 2 rolled around and they realized that they wanted the organization as a whole to play a bigger role in the series and not just the Sector V operatives, when Season 2 rolled around and they wanted the organization overall to play a bigger role, not just focus on the Sector V operatives, they decided that in addition to being a well-known and in addition to being a famous and highly respected operative, number 274 was also the supreme leader of the Kids Next Door organization in Season 2 and retroactively Season 1. And then by the Season 2 finale, they came up with the idea that number 274 would turn traitor and become one of the main villains of the series. And then after that, though, like I said, by the time Operation Treaty was, or by the time they were getting towards the end of the series run, this is when they came up with the idea that number 274 wasn't actually a traitor, but an undercover teen operative who was much more belligerent compared to number 9, who was much more collected about maintaining his cover. And while I'm thinking about the topic about this revelation, while number 270, yes, by the end of the series, by this episode, number 274 could be considered a paradoxical character in some ways. Yes, Codename Kids Next Door was actually really good about featuring morally ambiguous characters that may not necessarily have been purely good or purely evil here or there. You could say morally ambiguous characters, or characters that were anti-heroes or anti-villains, one of the various types of either of those alignments, anti-hero or anti-villain. Number 274, though, you could say he really borders between certain anti-heroes and anti-villain types. And it does sound paradoxical, but with the revelation and Operation Treaty, one could say that number 274 was both a nominal hero and a nominal villain at the same time. And like I said, I realize that sounds very paradoxical, but that might be the best way to describe number 274. Because on one hand, number 274 isn't really on the villain's side. He's just pretending to be a bad guy for part of his undercover mission. At the same time, though, while number 274 is actually on the same side of the Kids Next Door, even though he's pretending he's not, you could say that by the time Operation Treaty rolled around, he doesn't really act particularly good, even though he's supposed to be on the good guy's side. Yes, you could say that. Number 274, even though he's on the Kids Next Door side, his hatred for Number One is genuine. Yes, even though Chad is actually on the Kids Next Door side, him hating Number One and him being one of Number One's arch enemies, that was not an act. He really grew to hate Number One, and he really does consider Number One to be his arch enemy. And yes, Number One and Chad, number 274, were really intending to finish each other off by the end of the episode. So that's how I think you could consider 274 to be a nominal hero and a nominal villain. He's only pretending to be on the bad guy's side, but he's only really considered one of the good guys because he's fighting with the good guys. But he really did grow to be a very hateful adversary to Number One, at least. And that also does add a sense of tragedy. Because the flashback showed how Number One and number 274 grew a bond with each other. The season 2 finale, Operation End, did show Number One calling number 274 old friend, and we do see it goes further than that. Number 274 was also a mentor to Number One. But yeah, their bond has really been broken now. Number 274 genuinely hates Number One now and would have gladly finished him off if he had the chance. And yeah, that's also another deal. That's also what made this episode stand out. Usually, yes, this wouldn't be the first time where a work of fiction had that story where arch enemies or rivals get handcuffed together and they have to work together while they're handcuffed together. Usually after they are free, they do come to have a better respect for each other. Even if they're not necessarily friends, they still might have a mutual respect by the end of the ordeal. That wasn't the case here. Number One and Chad didn't really reconcile after the handcuffed incident. And they were actually willing to finish each other off. So that was definitely a dark turn and a rather tragic turn too. But it is sad to see how a former mentor and apprentice had such a broken bond by the end of this episode. And this goes along what some people would agree with, or some people would feel that, or some fans do feel that, or yes, I know many people in real life would feel that the worst enemy you could have is a former friend or a former ally of any kind, and I'm inclined to agree with that. I think the worst enemy you could have is someone who used to be your ally but turned against you and has become your hated enemy. I think that stings a lot more than someone who just doesn't like you in general. It's like, yeah, it's not pleasant dealing with other types of enemies, but someone who used to be your ally turning against you, I think that stings even more. So, yeah, there was definitely a lot of tension for Number One and number 274's bond being broken. It was quite tragic. And otherwise, number 274's character was the big focus for this episode, but another big deal is the truth about the Splinter Cell. It actually isn't a Splinter Cell. That's just a cover to maintain, that's just a cover to hide their tracks or to cover their tracks. And it's actually funny how Operation Amish actually indirectly hinted at that, or maybe that was intentional on their part. Yes, that might have been intentional on their part, that Operation Amish featuring a group pretending to be the Splinter Cell, but the Splinter Cell, maybe that was a clue that the Splinter Cell wasn't actually a Splinter Cell. I wouldn't put it past them if that was intentional, but yes, the Splinter Cell isn't actually the Splinter Cell, it's something else. And the series finale does clarify what the Splinter Cell really is when all is said and done. So we'll cross that bridge when we eventually get to it. But otherwise, we do find out number Infinity and number 74.239 were the shadowy figures that have been testing number one for something. And yes, we will get to see, while number Infinity, I don't think number Infinity appears in the TV series, if I remember right. I'll have to refresh my memory. But with regards to number 74.239, you can be assured he will be present for the series finale. He'll be the one to explain everything for number one when all is said and done. And otherwise, I guess one other big detail worth bringing up is the leader of the Teen Ninjas' appearance, the Steve. Yes, we find out that the Steve is the leader of the Teen Ninjas, and he's another example in the show of a minor major character. For those unfamiliar with that trope, that refers to a character who's important within the context of the setting of the story, but not within the context of the narrative of the story. So yes, in the Steve's case, he is important in the setting because he's the leader of the Teen Ninjas, but he ended up being pretty minor in the narrative of the story because this is his only appearance. Well, his only confirmed appearance, because there is some speculation with some fans. Now again, let me stress, this is just speculation. It hasn't been confirmed either way. It's just speculation on some fans' part. But some fans suspect that the Steve might actually be a teenage version of Number 100, the supreme leader of the Kids Next Door before Number 274 took the position. Yes, some fans have noticed how Number 100 and the Steve share similar designs, so this has led to some fans suspecting that maybe the Steve is Number 100 after he became a teenager. Again, this is just speculation. There's no explicit confirmation about this, but I can definitely understand the logic behind this speculation, and I think there is merit. Maybe if the sequel series or spin-off series ever gets greenlit, maybe they can clarify if this speculation is true or not, and maybe we can see more of the Steve. It is kind of a shame how he had a pretty minor role in the narrative despite his important role in the setting. It's sort of like Mr. Mogul, who was the president of the company behind the Rainbow Monkey merchandise. That's a pretty big deal in the setting of the story, but in the narrative, he only really had one major appearance in the series back in season 1, and he had a few cameos here or there, but yeah, the Steve and Mr. Mogul are probably the show's most notable examples of minor major characters. So there we go. That was definitely on the longer side, but being the last episode of Codename Kids Next Door and being a heavy hitter episode with a lot of revelations, there was definitely a lot to talk about, but we've covered it now. So now that we've covered all of the episodes and segments for Codename Kids Next Door, there's just 2 more TV specials to cover. I'll be covering the crossover TV special first, and then I'll cover the series finale TV special, but there we go. So overall, yes, this was a very important episode, being the last episode of Codename Kids Next Door. Despite not being the series finale, it still had a lot of important revelations. It does help to illustrate how the Gardner approach of storytelling was applied for certain details of Codename Kids Next Door. There's been some debate over whether 274's actual loyalties was out of left field or not. We got to meet a minor major character, and we did get to see just how broken a bond, or just how broken Number 1 and Number 274's bond became, which does add a sense of tragedy to the series. But yeah, I would say that's it for now. So as of this video, we've now discussed episode 78 of Codename Kids Next Door on this channel. Take care, and until next time.